JD Vance, Donald Trump's pick as his vice presidential candidate. Best known here for his memoir, Hillbilly Elegy, about growing up in a dysfunctional Appalachian family. His Scottish-Irish-American parents were divorced when he was young. His mother struggled desperately with drug addiction and poverty, and he was brought up by his grandparents before joining the Marine Corps, getting a university education in Ohio, then Yale Law School, then becoming a Silicon Valley investor, and then a US senator. A great American success story, and he's still only 38. A Roman Catholic, married to a Hindu, he's an economic nationalist and populist conservative who once, way back, described Trump as America's Hitler, but has now become his biggest supporter. Compared to Trump, at least, he is the deep thinker we heard. Kamala Harris, let's hear him now. This is from 2017, when he was being interviewed by the Barack Obama strategist David Axelrod on his Axe Files podcast.
On the drug addiction point, in a lot of ways, Mom was sort of on the vanguard of this crisis that has become incredibly epic, right? So it is now the leading cause of accidental death in the United States, surpassing gun violence, is overdoses from drugs. The thing that really caused her to start taking drugs the first time was the death of my grandfather, her dad, my papaw. You start to feel a little bit of pain, and maybe you take some drugs because it makes things better. And then all of a sudden you're in this addictive cycle where the best way to get high, the cheapest way to get high, is very often an illegal substance that's very, very dangerous. And so that's really where Mom has found herself. And for so much of my life, I was very resentful towards her. I had built her up as sort of a villain in my mind.
Glancy of the Sunday Times is a journalist who spent time with Vance and interviewed him, and he is with me now. Josh, great to have you on the show. Just tell me your impression of Vance when you first met him, because he's become already slightly a hate figure for people on the centre and the left of politics.
Yeah, so I met him at quite an interesting moment. It was the summer of 2017. Hillbilly Elegy, his best-selling memoir, had come out and was a runaway bestseller. And so fame was arriving at his front door. I remember I arrived at his house the same time as Megyn Kelly, the famous TV anchor. And he was also turning ideologically. At the time, he was a CNN pundit. He was sort of the man who explained Trump to the coastal elites. And that was his role.
The voice of Rust Belt America.
The voice of Rust Belt America, but he was very anti-Trump, and he'd called him cultural heroin, and he thought he was a charlatan, basically. But over the following year, he started to turn and started to rethink his attitude to Trump, and also, frankly, developed quite a visceral hatred for the coastal elites who were so keen to buy his book.
Very, very interesting. I guess the absolutely crucial question about him is he simply an opportunist who has seen that Trump is going to the top and tied himself to Trump's coattails and will now, as it were, kiss the ring? I put that delicately. Or is he somebody whose ideology meshes with Trump?
So, I mean, Andrew, you've seen enough political careers to know that the two are never extricable.
It does happen.
Ambition is central. And I think clearly when he went down to see Trump in 2021, he needed his blessing to run for the Senate in Ohio. And he was going to do whatever it took to get that blessing. And I've read accounts of that meeting. And, I think it was pretty sycophantic, if honest, because that is the only way you really get to deal with Trump, particularly if you've slagged them off.
You go and you bend the knee.
You bend the knee. Having said that, I think it was a mistake that we make in Britain and in America too to just write him off as an insincere opportunist. I think he means what he said. I think he's had a genuine ideological conversion. He converted to Catholicism on the way as well. So I think there's a real JD Vance in there.
Now, I've been listening a lot to what he's been saying and reading a lot what he's been saying. And it seems to me at the core of it is this sense that what they would call middle-class or working-class Americans, we would call working-class people in the Rust Belt who have been devastated by the opioid crisis, but also by the loss of jobs over so many decades, are completely ignored by the rich elites in Washington, New York, California. And what he takes from that is that, frankly, America first, nationalism, economic nationalism first, put up tariffs if you have to, I don't care about Ukraine, all of that. So we are going to see, if he's influential in the second Trump presidency, a Trump presidency which defiantly kind of turns its back on the rest of the world.
Yeah, I mean, I would probably make a distinction between the rhetoric we're going to hear from them and what the reality we might see. As Trump spoke about leaving NATO before he became president, but in reality he didn't leave NATO. He did galvanise it, shall we say, into countries spending a bit more money on defence.
And he wasn't wrong about that.
I don't think they would just withdraw, pull the rug out from Ukraine on day one. But clearly, were they to win, both Trump and Vance feel that they don't necessarily support Biden's position on Ukraine. So clearly that's worrying people in Kyiv. But I don't think it's quite as simple as, just shut up shop. I mean, Vance, for example, is pretty hawkish on China, and he buys into an idea that actually Ukraine is a bit of a sideshow compared to China. And what America should be doing is, if they're going to use their power abroad, it should be to fortify Taiwan and the Pacific.
And at home, he's taken very, very hard-line positions on kind of religious moral issues, particularly abortion. He's even more hard-line than Trump on abortion. And all of that. But it's interesting, people sort of suggest that he might be a racist. I listened to him talking in the podcast we've just heard a bit of, and he made the point that for him, family was everything, and loyalty to family and defending your family honour was everything. And he said the only other group, apart from the Appalachian white poor communities who felt like that in America, were American blacks. And he felt a lot of sort of sympathy for black America in that regard. So he seemed to me to be a rather more subtle and interesting and unexpected man than perhaps the caricature so far.
I think that's right. I think he is very thoughtful about these things. Clearly, he's married to an Indian American. I don't think it would be fair to call him a white supremacist, but he is quite ferocious in defence of his community and his tribe, which are the white working class of Appalachia and the surrounding areas. So he's not afraid to be tribal.
He's not. I mean, he had that notorious comment relatively recently at National Conservatism Conference when he said that Britain was heading towards being an Islamic state with nuclear weapons. And he said, before he said that, he said, I'm going to beat up on Britain a bit more. He knew what he was doing. Yeah,
I mean, I think that was quite a puerile comment, frankly. But it is important to remember with Vance, he's a millennial. He spends far too much time, like I do, marinating online. And I think he has been a little bit radicalised by some of the people he follows and speaks to. And stylistically, I think he's a little bit of a troll sometimes. And I think that is what he was doing there.
Because I was talking to David Lammy recently, could not be further away from JD Vance's politics. He's a left-of-centre British black politician, and yet they really got on very well. And when Lammy described Vance as a friend, I don't think he was entirely joking. I think, they both had a very tough early upbringing, and they bonded around that. They bonded about the importance of fatherhood and family. So again, there's more there than meets the eye.
Yeah, and also it's important to remember that a lot of Vance's economics are not that dissimilar to David Lammy's potentially. He is on the left in some ways economically. In the Senate, he's worked with Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders. He wants to drive up working class wages. He's not a right-wing conservative in every traditional sense of the term.
And how big a star is he in America? In other words, having him on the ticket, how much will that help Trump?
Well, I mean, I don't think that many Americans would have heard of him until last week, if we're honest, outside of people who follow these things.
People who buy Hillbilly Elegy.
Which was several million people. Yeah. But clearly he's being introduced to the country. Is he an asset? He certainly will be loved by the base, but they love Trump. He certainly is quite an interesting character who the media will want to write about and follow. But as you pointed out earlier, he's quite hardline on abortion. He's from Ohio, which is a state that is already Republican. He's not a play that he doesn't expand the tent, if you like. He's really someone who doubles down on the Trumpian line.
And how strong a character is he? I mean, it takes someone to actually stand up to Trump. Is he somebody, do you think, in the White House who would be, as it were, standing up to Trump, making arguments back against him? Or is he simply a sycophant who will go along with whatever Trump tells him to do?
Well, I don't think anyone ultimately stands up to Trump indefinitely, because it's just not how Trump operates. And he has bent the knee, as you put it earlier. But he knows his own mind. He's had a pretty tough path to where he's got to. He's been in the Marines. He's been through the ringer, and he's pretty tough-minded and resilient. So I don't think he'll be afraid to put his own position forward.
He certainly knows how it feels on the wrong side of the tracks. Josh Glancy, thank you very much indeed for joining me. Really, really interesting, that.